Hi everyone, thanks for joining. Sorry we've had a few technical difficulties as we start. I'll just stop showing screen so we can introduce ourselves. So you should be able to see all of us now. Let me just mess around here. Thanks for joining everyone, and yeah, let's get started. We're also going to be on Facebook Live as well. We've also got the chat function, which we'll explain in a second. Sifa, did you want to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, I'm Sifa. I'm the Senior Solicitor at this service. Thank you for joining us for this webinar. We'll be talking about why it's now safer to share your story with the Royal Commission after some recent changes to law. We have two Auslan interpreters today, Nicole and Georgia, and our captioner, Michelle. They're here to help keep this webinar accessible. You have the option, if you would like to enlarge the captions or the interpreter screens, try hovering on the bottom right-hand side of their screen, and you should get the option to enlarge. If you click that, that should hopefully make their screens bigger.
And I'm Oliver. I'm a solicitor at Your Story as well. And before we get started, we'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands in which we all meet. So I'm on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I'd like to pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge that it always was and always will be Aboriginal land. So thanks for joining again. Before we get going, let's talk about how you can get involved. This is the first time we've used this platform because we would love to have people join us on Facebook Live as another public platform. And we'd also like to acknowledge as well that this session is being recorded, but this doesn't mean that your name will be visible in the recording. So your camera and sound will be off and the recording will be public, but your name will not be. So bear with us if there are any technical glitches throughout, and there should be a chat function on this right-hand side. So if you type any questions at any time, then we'll try to look at them at the end. And you don't have to be shy when asking questions. What you type is only visible to us and not to all participants. So it's on the control panel on the right side of your screen, and like on the picture in the slide now. Sometimes your control panel might shrink. To expand it again, there's a red or orange button with an arrow in it. If you can't see the full control panel now, or this control panel shrinks, you can click on that button to make it reappear. To check that you can hear us and to practice using the question box, feel free to type where you're listening from today and maybe the lands in which you're writing from as well. So I'm on Gadigal land, and feel free to share where you're coming from today. And here's a little more information on controlling your screen. You should be able to move the screen up and down to reduce the size of a speaker's webcam. So you can have a look on the drop down that says everyone, and you can go to view presenter or view who's talking. If you just want to look at me, I'm wearing a Your Story shirt, and it's a little oversized, so I kind of look like Harry Potter wearing Dudley Dursley's hand-me-downs, but that's okay. So it's perfectly okay if you don't want to look at me and focus on the slides. All right, let's start off then with some context just about us and the support we can give. So sometimes people with a disability have been hurt, treated badly, refused help, or taken advantage of. This is wrong, and as many of you will know, the Disability Royal Commission has been set up to look at this. Your Story Disability Legal Support is a free legal service. We're independent of the Royal Commission, and we can answer your questions about sharing your story with the Royal Commission, like how you can share your story, how you can keep your story private, whether you can name the person or organisation that hurt you. If you've signed a legal document which says you can't talk about what happened, we can talk about what this means, whether sharing your story will affect you at work, and we can provide legal support so you can safely and confidently share your story. We'll give contact details at the end if you'd like to make an appointment.
So today we'll first cover why there was an issue with confidentiality before the changes were made. We'll then discuss how the law has changed, look at a case study of how this applies, and we should have plenty of time for questions later.
So the reason we're having this webinar is because there's been a change in law, and we'll just talk about what the issue was before there were the changes. So when you make a submission to the Royal Commission, you're asked how they can use your submission. The options are public, anonymous, or confidential. Previously, if you selected restricted or confidential, the information was only fully confidential for the life of the Royal Commission until September 2023. After that, it could potentially be accessed by freedom of information requests or by courts through what's called a subpoena. This caused a lot of concern for people with disability and supporters who wanted to be sure that their submission was kept confidential. People needed to feel confident that sensitive information stayed between them and the Royal Commission, and the Royal Commission couldn't guarantee that. For a long time, disability advocates, people with disability and supporters had asked for better protections for information given to the Disability Royal Commission. So I'll hand over to Sifa to talk about what changes were made.
So let's look at what the amendments change. So on the 30th of August, the Federal Parliament passed changes to improve confidentiality for people giving information to the Royal Commission. So submissions will now be kept confidential for 99 years after they're submitted. They can't be accessed by freedom of information or subpoena. So people can now feel safer to share their stories this way. There are other protections for information given confidentially. The first is statements and documents cannot be used as evidence against you in court, and it's also an offence for someone to share your story without your permission. There are, of course, exceptions similar to private sessions. In limited circumstances, the Royal Commission can pass on information about serious criminal offences or child protection issues that they would pass on to relevant authorities.
So if you want your information to be kept confidential, then these are some of the circumstances where this would apply. The changes apply when someone tells the Royal Commission about someone mistreating them, someone mistreating someone else, systems that disadvantage people with disability, and if they want to give ideas to improve the lives of people with disability. The information also has to identify you or the person you're talking about. And this doesn't have to be by name, just if people could work out that it was you. If you're not sure whether what you want to say fits within this, then feel free to speak to us. This also applies to people who have already made submissions, and you don't have to do anything for the information to be kept confidential after the end of the Royal Commission if you've already asked for it to be kept confidential.
A common question that we've received is how to take advantage of these changes. There are options on screen about what you can do. One way is to select restricted on the Royal Commission submission form, or otherwise indicate that you would like the information to be confidential. So as we've mentioned, if you're talking about submissions that you've already made, then you don't need to do anything for that information to be kept confidential and for the protections to apply.
We're still seeing the early impacts of the changes, including queries to our info line, who you can give us a call on at 1800 77 1800. We're receiving calls from people who have been waiting for the changes. This includes a client who I'll call Peter. Peter wanted to talk about abuse he'd faced at work, but still needed his job. We spoke in February this year. He felt that even though it was unlikely, there was a chance he would be treated worse because someone found out about his submission and applied to see it through freedom of information. We talked about other protections, and he still wasn't comfortable with making his submission. He decided he would wait until the confidentiality amendments passed before he was able to make his submission. Peter asked us to update him when the amendments passed. I've contacted Peter, and I later advised him that his information is better protected. He was then able to make his submission and feel safe and confident doing so because he knew that nobody else would be able to see it.
Well, you might have a situation similar to Peter's or a different situation that you would like advice about. So when should you come to your story? There are lots of reasons, particularly if you'd like an explanation of amendments and what it means to you. The list on the screen is not exhaustive and might provide some examples of what to speak about, including if the amendments apply to your submission, if you're protected as a whistleblower, what each of the confidentiality options mean, what will happen with your information, whether the changes apply to submissions that you've already made, and we can also give information about non-publication orders or non-disclosure agreements. Also speak to you about protections against retribution.
So there are lots of reasons to get advice, and it's not limited to this. So feel free to call us. The Royal Commission is still taking submissions. There's still time, and you can also call us to get advice generally about preparing your submission. So it looks like we've got plenty of time for questions, which is great. We just wanted to cover in particular the confidentiality amendments today. So if you have any questions about that specifically, then feel free to type in the chat box. You can type it to organisers and panellists only, and that'll get through to us. And so before we take questions from the audience, I'll just give you some details for if you want to get in touch. So on the screen, the number I mentioned, which is very catchy, it's 1-800-77-1800. Or if you would like to get in touch via email, you can call Your Story Disability at legalaid.queensland.gov.au. If you're an Indigenous person and you'd like to speak to an Indigenous lawyer, you can make that request. And if you're a queer lawyer, a queer client and you'd like to speak to a queer lawyer, then you can also make that request. Let's flick over to the first question we received, which was actually in the registration form. So the question was, what happens to your information after the end of the Royal Commission? And that included whether it was public or confidential. So to be clear, there are 4 options on the submission form that you can choose to differentiate how you'd like them to use your information. The first option is if you select public. This option means that you give the Royal Commission permission to put your submission online, and they might put it on their website without your contact details, and they might use your submission to tell a short version of your story or for a quote to be put on their website or in other documents without using your name. So at the moment, they have not been publishing submissions online in a public way, but so just to manage expectations there, but they still reserve the ability to do that if they want to. So that's the first option. The second is anonymous, not published on website. This option means that you give permission to the Royal Commission to use your submission online without using your name, and all identifying details will be removed from your submission. So anyone reading it would not know that it's about you. They might also use a short version of your story on their website or in other documents, again, without using your name. So the next option is not published on website, where your submission would not be put on the Royal Commission's website at all, but they may refer to your story without using your name in their documents, just not on their website. And the final option that we've been speaking about is restricted or confidential. So when it's confidential, it's kept between you and the Royal Commission. And that used to be up until the end of the Royal Commission, until September 2023. But as we've said in our webinar so far, then you can feel confident that it'll be confidential beyond that as well. So if you'd like to ask any questions, feel free to go into the chat and direct it to the organisers and panellists. And to be clear, when I mentioned that you can ask to speak to an Indigenous lawyer or a queer lawyer, we'll do our best. There's no guarantee on that, but you can certainly ask for that. Other than we're a collaboration between legal aids and Aboriginal legal services so that we can provide culturally appropriate service to people. All right, so if you have any questions, feel free to type them in, and maybe maybe Kim, if you'd be able to read them out if you can see them.
Sure, thanks, Oliver. So we've got a question. Do the new amendments essentially make a notice to produce superfluous? In what circumstances would you still recommend applying for an NTP?
So that's a great question. And the first part, I'll just explain briefly about a notice to produce. So that's a document where you can get extra protections by requesting that from the Royal Commission. The questioner clearly knows that, but just for context. And the question then is, are the protections from the notice to produce unnecessary? And what circumstances would you still apply for a notice to produce? So to be clear, the new laws around confidentiality extend some of the protections of a notice to produce automatically to confidential submissions. So it can't be used against you in a civil or criminal court, and you can't, unauthorized disclosure is a criminal offence. So those protections are there automatically. In circumstances where you think that retribution is a possibility or disadvantage in employment, these are particular reasons to get a notice to produce. So we've been in contact with the Royal Commission about the different circumstances where a notice to produce is necessary and when it will be given. So in some situations, a notice to produce will no longer be necessary, but because the confidentiality amendments don't have protections against retribution, then if you think somebody is going to do something bad to you as a result of you making a submission, come to Your Story and we can talk about extra protections beyond the confidentiality amendments.
Thanks, Oliver. The next question is, I noticed your email is New South Wales. Are you able to support people in Queensland also?
Certainly can. So the email is, we have one for our info line, which is yourstorydisability@legalAid.qld.gov.au. And that is the central first point of contact, but you can also contact at the New South Wales. So I'm based in Sydney and Sifa is based in Sydney, but we're a nationwide service and we have lawyers in each state as well. So we provide a service in every jurisdiction, and I speak to people on the phone or on Zoom or Teams a lot of the time from all over the country. So just because I'm based in Sydney and employed by Legal Aid New South Wales doesn't mean that we can't support you no matter where you are in Australia.
Any other questions?
We've got a thank you from the person who asked that question. If you do have a question, please do feel free to pop it in the questions box. We are keeping these anonymous. You could also comment on the Facebook page. We are having some technical issues with our live stream, so we do apologise for that. but we will be sharing the recording on our Facebook page after this. So that's all the questions that I see in front of me. For now, I might just check the Facebook post and come back to you.
Great. I'll just respond to one more question that I received a lot, and that's how does this interact with non-publications orders made by a court? So a non-publication order may apply to a submission depending on what information a person wants to share with the Royal Commission. In some situations, maybe a confidential submission or attending a private session can protect you, but it's a good idea to get advice from a Your Story lawyer on the best way forward if there is a non-publication order.
Thanks, Oliver. And we've had another question. Do you do speaking engagements around the state? I'd like to organise someone to come to us in central Queensland if that's possible.
Sifa, do you want to take this one?
Yes, we do. Thanks for that question. So as Oliver mentioned, we've got lawyers in different jurisdictions, including Queensland, and we definitely will be able to attend to give information to people about our service and the support that we can give. So you can contact us through that email address or through the information line if you wanted to, just letting us know about what you were hoping for us to present about, and we're happy to work with you to be able to facilitate that. Obviously, at this time with the travel restrictions, having lawyers from different jurisdictions might be limited, but we do have our lawyers in Queensland that would be able to facilitate that.
Thank you, Sifa. And we've got a question from WA. Can you still take legal action against an agency that you are submitting to the Commission about, or do you wait for the Commission's response?
I'm happy to answer that question.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the Royal Commission doesn't investigate individual situations. You may make a submission or have a private session about your individual situation, but they wouldn't be offering any recourse to those issues. So you are always open and able to share that with the Royal Commission and have ongoing legal proceedings directly with, say, a service provider about the same matter. There are, of course, issues that you need to be aware of in terms of how you share that information with the Royal Commission, particularly if you've already started legal proceedings. So we would encourage you to come to us for advice about that.
Thank you, Sifa. And that's all the questions in the questions panel for now. Feel free to pop one in because we do still have more time left. There's no other questions coming in from Facebook. Were there any further ones that you wanted to address from the registrations, Oliver?
No, that's about it. I think some of them were requests for content that we ended up covering. And then there was the one about how they use your information. So I've just put back up on the screen the email here about that is the contact point, yourstory@legalaid.qld.gov.au. You can visit us on your website. We want to thank you for your time today. We really appreciate it. And thank you to Nicole and Georgia, our interpreters, Michelle, who has been captioning, and Kim and Yasmin for organising, and of course Sifa for being a fellow presenter. So thanks very much, everyone. Sifa or Kim, did you have anything to add?
No, nothing from me. Thank you everyone for joining us today. And of course, thank everyone who has supported us to present this today, and to you as well, Oliver.
All right, everyone. Okay, early mark, everyone. Enjoy your lunchtime. We're all, no, that's very Sydney centric. In WA, it'll be enjoy your morning tea. Thank you, everyone, and have a good afternoon.